Live from Washington, D.C., Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. And now, Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, Sekulow.
پرچم شیطان است، پرچم شیطان بزرگ است. مرگ بر اسرائیل، مرگ بر امریکا.
Graphic new video of violent protests and terror attacks coming out of Israel.
They have a gender apartheid inside Gaza. Christians are evacuating because churches are being burned. Their doctrine is fascist and genocidal against Jews.
Today, the group Hamas declared a day of rage, urging attacks on Israelis.
Peace has no greater enemy than the forces of militant Islam.
Any moment, you know, these rockets and missiles on the border with Lebanon could be sprung and fired against Israel.
Iran gets nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia will, Egypt will, Turkey, perhaps others. So in 5 to 10 years, you could have a multipolar nuclear Middle East with half a dozen countries with nuclear weapons. That is a formula for insecurity.
And Al-Qaeda are these terrorist groups with the goal of destroying the West.
We got multiple officers here. We got officers running here, back eastbound, chasing, now on foot.
So we understand people are scared, and we understand that there's concern that there may be more folks out there.
When they say that Israel should be wiped out, that they mean it?
I don't have the luxury not to believe this.
Israel's right to exist has been a cornerstone for the ACLJ since its inception. With an office in the heart of Jerusalem, ACLJ continues to be a leader in the advocacy for the Jewish state of Israel. Chief Counsel Sekulow has brought together ACLJ's leading experts from around the globe to present Protecting the Promised Land, the Case for Israel.
Hey, welcome to the broadcast, everyone. And this is a special day indeed, and that is the embassy, the United States Embassy in Israel has now been relocated to Jerusalem. What does that mean? It means the United States, back in December, recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. That was significant. That law had been on the books for 20 years, but no president had the guts to do it, and this president did. And what he did was not only recognize Jerusalem as the capital, but took the consulate in Jerusalem and converted it into the embassy. It's historically significant for two reasons. Number one, a sovereign nation, Israel, has the right to determine where its capital is. In this particular case, it has been Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the Jewish people, of the Jewish state of Israel. That's number one. Number two, we're just complying with international law, recognizing that a sovereign nation's capital is where that sovereign nation says its capital is. So this was also symbolically significant because it's not just the United States. Guatemala is going to be recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and other governments are now saying they're going to do the same thing. So you've got this move. It takes this issue off the table. Now, on the broadcast today, we're talking about a case for Israel, protecting the promised land. And by the way, this is a special that we put together, but you can get the whole special on our website as well.
You can get that at acljfilms.com. aclfilms.com. Again, acljfilms.com will have that available, so you can find that right there. It's Protecting the Promised Land. It's a new full-length documentary by our team at ACLJ Films. Fantastic piece. You sit down, have a round table. We also have news pieces, round table with some of the leaders from Israel.
And it is now official, as we're coming to you today, the United States of America's embassy for the United States, for Israel, is now located in Jerusalem. This is something we've been working on for over 20 years.
Yeah, it's a big deal. It's a lot bigger deal than maybe even some have seen, as we've seen these big moves in the last 12, 24 months, or 12 months really, for Jerusalem. And we put together this piece at ACLJ Films that you're really going to enjoy. You're going to hear excerpts from that today throughout the rest of the show. However, if you want to see the full-length documentary that we've put together, all you have to do is go to acljfilms.com and follow the instructions on how to watch it, where to watch it. It'll all be available there, again, on acljfilms.com. And make sure you share that with your friends. Go share that link. It's something that they need to see. They need to know why it's important for Jerusalem to be the capital. They also need to know why it's important and why Israel and all these things happen in such a small country, and why it makes such a huge difference around the world. Again, that's at acljfilms.com.
All right, we're going to be back with more on this, including our special. This is a great program we put together. What a week to celebrate Israel. What a week to celebrate the United States recognition of Jerusalem as the capital with the move of the embassy. Back with more in a moment.
I wanted this book to send a very clear message and present a very clear defense on the importance of recognizing Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. I wanted to dispel the legal myths that were out there that Israel doesn't have the right to exist as a Jewish state, that Israel could not designate Jerusalem as its capital, that under international law the Israelis were somehow violating the human rights of others. And none of that was true. They're engaged in lawfare, utilization of the legal system to delegitimize the state of Israel. I built this almost as a Supreme Court case. Not only Israel has the right to exist, but has the right to exist as a Jewish state, and that they're entitled to the full recognition of any other sovereign government.
From New York Times bestselling author Jay Sekulow comes his new book, Jerusalem, a biblical and historical case for the Jewish capital. Available on tbn.org. That's tbn.org.
We just heard Death to America, Death to Israel in the opening of this documentary. I want to start with you, David Benjamin, first. You served in the Israeli Defense Forces, still do, in the reserves. You're dealing with international law issues. But the Death to America, Death to Israel has been the thematic of these groups in the region. What is the situation in the region right now as you see it?
Well, I would say if they don't mean it, why are they making such an effort to create this build-up just about on every frontier that Israel has, particularly in the north now in Syria? In Lebanon, it's not a new story. You have Hezbollah now with an arsenal in the region of 140,000 rockets, all of them from Iran. You have the Houthi situation in Saudi Arabia now creeping up from the southern front. You have Hamas in Gaza, who are being supported by Iran. If you step back and look at the picture, you can see the circle enclosing around Israel and think, well, why make the effort if they're not being serious about carrying out their threats?
So, which raises the next issue, Rami, and that is the nature of the threat and the Iran factor. Iran has become a major player in the region now, and there's a history to this that a lot of people do not know.
Well, if you come from the intelligence field where I come from, we always have to measure intent and capabilities. And regarding the intent of the Iranians, we just heard death to America, and we hear it from their leaders for many, many years. Regarding the capabilities, they're trying to develop atom bombs in order to rule the world. Now, going back to what David has been saying, the Iranians have been trying to take over the Middle East, get all the way up to the Mediterranean, just like they used to rule that region 2,500 years ago. And when you listen to the Iranians and you look at their actions, the Houthis are Shiites in Yemen that are shooting missiles at Riyadh's airports and are trying to take over Bab el-Mandeb straits in the sea in order to control the oil flow to the west. So when you look at Syria, when you look at Lebanon, when you look at what they're doing with Hamas in the south, you understand that they mean business when they speak about death to America, and they mean business when they speak about death to Israel.
Iranians have stated openly, simply, openly, that they want to destroy the state of Israel. Period. Exclamation point.
They speak of illegitimacy in the name of God. From Iran, from Hezbollah, and from Hamas, you hear that it's a religious commandment that Israel should not exist, that a non-Muslim state cannot be here. If this has the upper hand, this trend, it's going to be tougher. This layer of religious fanaticism on top of political debates makes debates almost without a resolution. Because, you know, gods never compromise. People do.
You're dealing with a regime headed up by a religious fanatic. The Ayatollah in Iran has a religious view that has no place for the state of Israel, fellow Muslims who disagree with him, and our country. He is a religious Nazi. On the day we voted on the Iran nuclear deal, he tweeted out, Allah willing, Israel won't exist in 25 years.
Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei posted incendiary comments about Israel. He flatly predicted that Israel won't be around 25 years from now.
And he warned that between now and then, Israel would have to worry about what he called the, quote, spirit of fighting heroism and jihad.
Today, after 2 years of negotiations, the United States, together with our international partners, has achieved something that decades of animosity has not. A comprehensive long-term deal with Iran that will prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
A bad deal is worse than no deal. We need to have a good deal here.
This deal will not stop Iran from getting a bomb. This deal will all but guarantee it.
The Iranian nuclear deal may actually be worse than we originally imagined.
I think the deal is absolutely horrible for us, but it's really, really bad for Israel.
And we're handing over hundreds of billions of dollars in sanctions relief.
Iran is going to have access to $150 billion in assets.
Israelis have been telling us, you know, this kind of deal is giving Iran the legitimacy to enrich uranium.
Once Iran is able to perform a nuclear test, it would have a shield, a nuclear mushroom all over Iran that would deter the US and Israel from doing anything to retaliate against Iran or work against Iran when it supposed jihadist groups in the Middle East or worldwide.
If Iran gets nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia will, Egypt will, Turkey, perhaps others. So in 5 to 10 years, you could have a multipolar nuclear Middle East with half a dozen countries with nuclear weapons. That is a formula for insecurity.
Think of how arrogant Hezbollah will act, and Hamas, if Iran wins and it gets nuclear. So I think the stakes are very high.
If Iran gets the bomb, even if it doesn't use it, it would alter profoundly the history of the Middle East.
Iran's rulers promised to destroy my country, murder my people, and the response from this body, the response from nearly every one of the governments represented here has been absolutely nothing. Utter silence. Deafening silence.
All right, we'll be back with more from our film, Protecting the Promised Land, which again, full-length film available right now on acljfilms.com. We'll be right back.
I wanted this book to send a very clear message and present a very clear defense on the importance of recognizing Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. I wanted to dispel the legal myths that were out there that Israel doesn't have the right to exist as a Jewish state, that Israel could not designate Jerusalem as its capital, that under international law the Israelis were somehow violating the human rights of others. And none of that was true. They're engaged in lawfare, utilization of the legal system to delegitimize the state of Israel. I built this almost as a Supreme Court case. not only Israel has the right to exist, but has the right to exist as a Jewish state, and that they're entitled to the full recognition of any other sovereign government.
From New York Times best-selling author Jay Sekulow comes his new book, Jerusalem, a biblical and historical case for the Jewish capital. Available on tbn.org. That's tbn.org.
We have to talk about America's interest in the region, and that's starting with our defense as a country of Israel and why it's strategically important.
Absolutely. I was at a meeting not long ago, within the last year and a half, with the Egyptian consul in New York. And it was a meeting of members of Congress and a couple of people from think tanks. And the ambassador, he was pleading with us, saying, why don't you see the threat? He said, why don't you see the threat from the region? It's a threat to your country. It's a threat to your country before any other country. He said, we see it. We know we have Egyptian nationals in this country, and they go to mosques where they're being radicalized. And we know if Iran gets this nuclear deal, which they now have, right, we will absolutely have to get nuclear weapons. The Saudis will absolutely have to get nuclear weapons because, you know, and here's how you know the truth. Israel has had a nuclear capability, you know, the secret that everyone knows, for decades. And there's not been an arms race. There's not been a nuclear race in the Middle East because they know Israel will not first launch. Israel just wants a defensive capability. But they know that's not true about Iran. So first you know that Iran will use it. The second thing is Iran is developing intercontinental ballistic missiles, not to reach Israel, but to reach us in this country.
Let's talk, Mark, about this. Israel's an ally of the United States, but this ongoing conflict, you look at it historically, over the modern time of Israel's existence, the last 70 years, this ongoing conflict has been continuous. And the fact is, sometimes it's different players coming to the forefront. Now it's Iran. But the regional conflict focused on Israel, there's a historic record that is indisputable.
If you just look at the modern era, from 1920, Israel's given this wonderful small area for close settlement of the land in the San Remo Treaty. And then in 1922, the League of Nations sets up a mandate. Israel's finally going to have a place where Jews can come and settle. And then 78% of it is lopped off and given to Transjordan. And you think, all right, fine, the Jews will remain in that last 22%. Then the first plan, the Peel Commission, gives 80% of that they try to give away, and Jews will have 20%. Throughout history, at every single point in time, all people have tried to do is cut Israel into smaller and smaller pieces, and eventually the time came in 1948, and again in 67, and again in 73, and we see it again today. They just, you know what, forget anything, let's just wipe them off the map. And yes, the players keep on changing, but unfortunately the ideology behind it has never been about peace.
There's an interesting dynamic with all this, though, and that is that the United States has a strategic interest. What is new is what the region is starting to shape like, the look of the region as far as who the players are. So I want to talk about that for a minute. There's been wars. Mark just laid out some of those wars, but then it's always, there's like the war between wars.
You know, in the last 7 years, the Middle East went through an earthquake. Countries have been turned apart. If you look at what happened in Sudan, if you look at what happened in Egypt, if you look at what happened in even in the Palestinian Authority, a lot of changes. Israel has to face new type of enemies. The countries became proxies of Iran, and Israel has to face threats from different terrorist groups, and we call it stealth wars. And the reason we're fighting those stealth wars, which is an everyday fight, is to prevent the next war.
So when you're engaging in a stealth war, and you're the lawyer advising the military, you face different kind of challenges. The other side is not engaging in the laws of armed conflict when they engage. They use civilians as targets. This is part and parcel of how they operate. So what does that put on you as the lawyer representing Israeli military?
You've touched on a crucial legal point, because once upon a time, people spoke about the law of war. And the idea was that applies in situations where armies, entire armies clash against one another. And these situations in between, the war between wars, as Rami has put it, what law actually applies there? And it really took Israel to stick its neck out initially and say, you know, these are also armed conflicts. These are wars just on a lower intensity. We need to apply the same laws. We can't get by, as much of the world has expected in the past, on just applying regular principles, say, of criminal law. The idea that terrorists are criminals, you have to arrest them, put them on trial. You can't apply that to an organization like Hezbollah, which is a more powerful military than most countries on earth, or even Hamas. So legally, that has been very significant, that the law of war is actually, it's relevant on all different levels of intensity, and including in the war between wars.
But right over there and right over there are two villages controlled by Hezbollah, and we've got, coming in our background right now, jeeps from the Israeli Defense Force. This is the blue line. How significant of a zone is this? How dangerous of a zone is this?
You know, I must say that in my experience for the past 30 years, you know, I've been to this movie before.
Yeah.
Maybe the difference is now it's a 3D movie
yeah.
with so many other forces involved. But this is a security border in Israel. There's peace now. It's a fragile peace. It's a deceptive peace.
Why do you say it? We talked about that before. Why deceptive peace?
It's deceptive because at any moment, you know, these 40,000 rockets and missiles on the border with Lebanon could, you know, be sprung and fired against Israel.
After the war, the Lebanon army took place on the forts and on the border. We see a lot of movement of the UN, but we know to the citizen vehicles that the Hezbollah own, we know they're looking out, and we know they're preparing for the next battle day.
We're asserting that Iran is actually engaging in this war through Hezbollah. Is that the sense that you have as you're training?
Sure, that's what we learn also. All the weapons, the training is all Iranian money and techniques.
You can find the Iranian regime fingerprints everywhere. In Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in the Palestinian arena, in Yemen, in South America.
In the north, we have Iran, Hezbollah, which is an Iranian division on our border, practically and literally and in every sense, you know, directed directly from Iran.
When you look at your neighbors, David, as an Israeli, you've got the leadership of Syria being propped up right now by the Russians and the Iranians. Yet you have the Sunnis, in the form of ISIS, trying to gain a foothold. And you're a lawyer that gives legal advice to the military in Israel, and you've got a border with Syria.
Yeah.
What are you facing?
You know, I'd like to quote the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. He said, "My enemy's enemy is my enemy."
Yeah.
I think that so perfectly sums up the situation which is developing in Syria, which is over the years. It's really complicated. It raises all sorts of legal questions about who exactly is the enemy, who's attacking you, who isn't attacking you at any given time. The map can actually change.
Rami, looking at it diplomatically, because you have to look at it diplomatically, there has been a realignment, a strategic realignment within the region. I mean, 20 years ago, the thought that the Israelis and the Saudis would have the kind of relationship they now have, completely unexpected. And it is the common enemy. You deal with Jordan and Egypt. What is the sense when you're dealing with those world leaders as they view Israel right now? How does al-Sisi in Egypt view Israel? How does King Abdullah in Jordan view Israel right now?
I was actually a guest of the King of Jordan in Amman, Abdullah, about 3 years ago. And he was speaking about the Arab Spring as the Arab winter. He saw what's happening. He saw ISIS coming to its border from the Syrian side. He saw ISIS coming to his borders from the Iraqi side. And he felt very threatened about it. Sisi just spoke yesterday about the peace with Israel. It's 40 years since Sadat came to Israel, just this week. Sisi spoke about the peace with Israel as a blessing to Egypt and to the region. I believe that if we go back to the Iranian strategy that has been revealed to take over the Middle East, actually a lot of people believe that Iran wants to take over Mecca because of religious reasons. So if you take the intentions of Iran and you look at the abilities of Israel, today the Arabs, the Sunni countries, are looking at Israel's abilities to intercept missiles, for example, which we learned to do after the Gaza wars. They look at Israel's ability to defend itself. And they look at the Israeli interest to stop the Iranians. They saw the Israel war in 2006, the second Lebanon war with Hezbollah. They saw our different wars in Gaza. They saw the ability that we have. They received some of our technologies. So today, both Sisi and Abdullah and the Gulf states leaders understand that in order to stop Iran, we have to work together.
You've traveled to that region, the Gulf states. What was your sense? Because you met with leaders while you were there.
You know, the individuals that are running those countries are the same people or families, oftentimes, who are funding the people flying planes into our buildings. So it's complicated. You don't want to rely on them as your number one ally. If it comes down to who you want to stand next to in a battle, you want to stand next to an Israeli. You don't want to stand next to an Iraqi soldier that's running away or attacking the base where the Americans are at. And so that's the sense that you pull, is that there's obviously a big American presence. And that's why our president can go into Saudi Arabia and use the terminology radical Islamic terrorism, and people are not running towards the door. It's not that idea, because these regimes understand it's a threat from within to them, to their existence. And so you can call yourself a king, but your kingdom may not be very stable. You could be a prince, but the other royal family is the person writing the check to ISIS. It gets more complicated in that region than it does, I think, for the Iranians. They have a supreme leader. So when they come in, they've got their guardian council of 12, but they have a supreme leader who sets all of their religious, ideological, political motivations, and their spread of their networks now, I think it's very frightening. You wouldn't think of an Iran that would fire a missile into or authorize one of its proxies to fire a missile at the Saudis.
All right, that's going to do it for today's show. Again, if you want to see the full-length documentary put together by our great team here at ACLJ Films, just go to acljfilms.com, where you can find out how to watch, again, Protecting the Promised Land. You can also find out about all our other films we've made over the last decade, but Protecting the Promised Land is the new film about Israel and the current situation there. You can find that, again. Just go there, easy. You'll see the instructions on how to watch it. acljfilms.com.
I wanted this book to send a very clear message and present a very clear defense on the importance of recognizing Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. I wanted to dispel the legal myths that were out there that Israel doesn't have the right to exist as a Jewish state, that Israel could not designate Jerusalem as its capital, that under international law the Israelis were somehow violating the human rights of others. And none of that was true. They're engaged in lawfare, utilization of the legal system to delegitimize the state of Israel. I built this almost as a Supreme Court case. Not only Israel has the right to exist, but has the right to exist as a Jewish state, and that they're entitled to the full recognition of any other sovereign government.
From New York Times bestselling author Jay Sekulow comes his new book, Jerusalem, a biblical and historical case for the Jewish capital. Available on tbn.org. That's tbn.org.